Hey guys, so we all know that with any kind of story, whether it's a motion picture, a television series, or in this case a comic book or a comic series, you know, sometimes there are ideas and concepts that are in what we would assume to be the rough draft, first draft, if not the final draft, that pretty much get cut out due to either time restraints or the fact that they just, don't fit into what basically the publisher or those that are licensing the product, the franchise to be publicized or adapted or whatever, consider to, you know, basically be part of what the franchise is or represent the franchise, as it is. And when it comes to the Sonic comics, that's no different, especially during the Archie time, or during the time under the Archie banner, if you know what I mean. And recently, as I did, mention in a video not that long ago, and I actually talked about it a little bit, when I talked about the 25 years ago Endgame video, because yes, this does mark 25 years since Endgame came out. Basically, in my reply video to Sonic Vegeta's recent podcast of the Archie Sonic Digest podcast, where they took a break from talking about the storyline, the story arc going on at the time of the comics, to kind of pay more attention to the lawsuit going on, or had been going on, and had been updated with more information concerning Ken Penders, Archie, and such. One of the things they did in that podcast is they decided to divide it into a couple of acts, or a couple of parts. And the second to last act, or the next to last act, that they decided to utilize for was the Unused concepts by Ian Flynn. But also in the podcast, when they were talking about Ken Penders, they also brought up some of his unused concepts. So that's what we're going to do here. We are going to, as I look at the time here, at almost 2.5 minutes. Hold on while I get a flashlight here. It's kind of hard to see when you don't have, like the sun's light looking at you. Yeah, at 2 minutes and 40 seconds, or almost at 3 minutes, we're going to basically talk about the unused concepts of both, writers. So, at 3 minutes, let's talk about the unused, altered concepts, if you will, of Ken Penders. So, at 3 minutes and 10 seconds, let's start with Ken himself. So, believe it or not, these are all the pages from the Archie Sonic fandom combined on both Ken and Ian's unused concepts that they wanted to put into the book, or some of the stories they had in mind. So, with Ken Penders here, I get some coffee to keep me going. With Ken Penders, let's talk about some of his unused and altered villains. Now, I'm sure a lot of us have heard about this by now, but for those that don't or haven't, basically Ken Penders, long story short, was the initial head writer from about the mid-portion, I wouldn't say mid-portion, but I would say about, he became one of the head writers, if not the head writer, around issue 11. That's right, he became the head writer around issue 11 of the comic, and a lot of his stories, along with the help of Mike Gallagher and all that, would be a staple up until about issue 17, 18, and into the 20s, when they started to become more Sat AM-like, more Saturday morning-like, because I think by Ken's own admission that since the series had, been canceled around this time, that they wanted to kind of incorporate that storytelling into the comics. And it wouldn't be until we hit like almost issue 25 that we started to really see that. A good example, if you want, in my opinion, is the main story of issue 29. And it's an issue I had since high school, where Sally, for the first time, does get roboticized. Thankfully, she does get de-roboticized at the end, because that's how typical of a Saturday AM episode would be, like around season 2, or if it would have happened the official season 3. But anyway, let's get into his unused and altered villain. Now, this is from the Sonic fandom. This is from Archie Sonic, archiesonic.fandom.com, the abandoned and unused concept section. This is the unused and altered villains for Ken Penders. These are basically villains and that he wanted to use originally in a different kind of way, but were either rejected or altered to be who we know them as now. So, for example, it says here, and I quote, one of the earliest story ideas pitched by Ken Penders involved 2 villains who were essential parodies of the Super Mario Brothers, in reference to Sega and Nintendo's fierce rivalry in the 90s. Early drawings, which you can find at archive.org, basically they put in parentheses the early drawings for the parodies you can find at archive.org. That's a link here in the page, if you will. It says, this idea was rejected by Sega for being too obvious. However, this did not stop Fleetway from introducing their own take on the idea in the Mario Brothers. Mario, which I think they gave a W, or Marioxo Brothers. They put an X there to kind of, I guess, avoid copyright. So yeah, he had an idea. Ken Penders had an idea to basically play on the fierce rivalry Nintendo and Sega were having. So he thought, who can I introduce as villains, even for a one-time shot? And the thought was, oh, I know, I'll put in this a parody of Mario and Luigi. Sega, though, saw that as being too obvious and said, nope, that's not going to happen. However, what's ironic, as I mentioned, is that Fleetway did it not that long after. The only difference was they put an X after the R, if you will, to kind of avoid copyright. Now, we do have to be reminded of one thing, though. Fleetway Comics is a UK comic. So in the UK and other parts of the world, they have a little bit more freelance on what they're able to get away with. And you also got to remember that Sega of Europe, is more responsible for Fleetway's adaptation than Sega of America. So Sega of Europe was probably like, yeah, go ahead. We have no problem with it. And thus we ended up getting the parody of the Mario Brothers. Now, he does also mention that an early idea, now this does go on, I should say, to mention, that another earlier idea for a character was Evil Sonic. He says, they say, and I quote, that Ken's earlier idea for Evil Sonic were plentiful. These concepts involve Sonic's anti-Mobius counterpart being Dr. Sonic, a version of Sonic who, judging by the name, would have been in Dr. Robotnik's role. So in other words, one of the ideas he had originally before settling on the Evil Sonic, who would go on to be Scourge later on, character, one of the ideas was to make him basically the Robotnik of that world, basically make him the tyrant of that world in the role of Robotnik himself, but as Dr. Sonic and stuff. And that probably would have been an interesting concept to see how far they would take that character, especially later on. Now, they do go on to talk about the Princess Sally miniseries, and of course, we've heard about this many, many times. It says, and I quote, Ken Penders and Michael Gallagher had originally pitched 2 alternative storylines for the comic's first 3-issue miniseries starring Princess Sally. The first pitch involved around an alternate origin for Alicia Acorn. Sally would discover that her mother was roboticized and was currently leading an underground civilization. Had this plot come to fruition, the Roby and Alicia would have gone on to become a recurring threat to both the Knothole Freedom Fighters and Dr. Robotnik. So, That too, in its own right, sounds very intriguing, because what that would have done from a story perception would have had, at times, depending on if the story, allowed for it, and probably would have had, Robotnik and the Freedom Fighters teaming together to fight Alicia because of how much of a threat she was, leading her own little world, her own little kingdom, and not being clear in the mind because she's now roboticized and her mind is kind of askew. And it would have been a great character developing moment for Sally, because I think if you look at it from a perspective of, believe it or not, Ken himself, I think the idea originally for Sally in this moment was to be the only one that would finally get through to her mom and be able to save her and probably bring her back to Knothole for possible de-robotization in the near future, but at least get her stabilized to where she could start slowly getting back to being, the mother she loved, even in a robotic body. That's what I'm assuming. But the idea here, I think, has merit. The second idea that they came up with, the second pitch, involved Sally and Bunny Rabbit, that is, doing a Thelma and Louise and heading off on a road trip to stop a threat that had come about on the other side of Mobius. Now, Thelma and Louise, in case you guys don't know, is a movie about two friends who I think become more than friends, or subtly hinted at. They go on this road trip across the country just to get away from it all, just to prove that, hey, they can take care of themselves and stuff. And again, it does have LGBTQ undertones in it between the two. So I don't know if maybe with them pitching the idea that Sally and Bunny were going to do a road trip across Mobius, or to the other side of Mobius, to face a threat that was, basically becoming a problem over there. I don't know if maybe they kind of, saw that it was going to be sort of a Thelma and Louise-like storyline. And maybe at that time, because it was still taboo, it was going to have LGBTQ lesbian undertones. So I don't know if maybe that's why the Thelma and Louise road trip storyline for the Sally miniseries was also rejected as well. It goes on to say, let's see. Okay, never mind. Let's see. It kind of cuts off a little bit. It does go into Endgame, though. I can tell you that it does go into Endgame. And it does mention, like I mentioned in the previous video, that Endgame was initially meant to be the last story, because Ken Penders, and he himself again has gone on record about this, he initially believed that the comic didn't have that long of a shelf life, and felt that 50 issues was probably the best, number to bring it to an end. However, Archie Comics saw the sales going up and figured, hey, we could continue this on for much longer, as long as we can. So they told Ken, nope, comics continuing, you got to come up with some more stories to help continue the comic. And when he came up with originally was, okay, if I got to continue the comic, I'll have Sally really die, but the Sally that we see later on will be a robot. It'll be a robotic doppelganger, which will serve as Robotnik's last piece of revenge on Sonic even after he's dead. Basically, it'd be Robotnik getting revenge from the grave. However, Sally dying initially in the comic, and then even this idea to, I believe to an extent, where she would come back but as a robot doppelganger, as Robotnik's last bit of revenge from the grave. These were all shot down by Sega, because Sega themselves had said, and I quote, "We have marketing plans for this character." And my thought process at that, upon hearing that, seeing as though that's around 96, 97, my thought process on that is as I've said before, the Sonic Live in Sydney stage show that was in the indoor Sega World theme park in Sydney, Australia. Because Sally was a major part of that show. As a matter of fact, her character, which I don't know if you can see it right here, this plush that I've shown you before, was one of the original plushes sold in the theme park. to help promote the show and everything. It was sold with her vest and all that, and it has the little tag on it that says copyright Sega. So Sega, obviously, in my opinion, was alluding not only to that, but possible other marketing ploys as well. I think there was some things here in America that Sally was, had her picture put on, her face put on, to tie in with the Sonic franchise at that time. Because in '97, Sonic was still a very popular franchise, but it was not, gaining the steam. Was not, well, I would say, not keeping up with the steam and the speed that the character was initially known for when it came to games that they were trying to market to the audience and everything. And one of the games, of course, that they wanted to market was Sonic Mars or Sonic Extreme, which would have incorporated the Freedom Fighters to an extent. So that's basically what I get from Sega's reasoning for preventing Sally from being killed off in permanently in the comics. Now, we go on to the Knuckles comic and Cancellation and Sonic Adventure, how it ties all together. Basically, they state that originally the comic's full-length adaptation of the game Sonic Adventure were slated to run between 4 issues of Archie Sonic the Hedgehog and 2 issues of Archie Knuckles the Echidna, as well as a Sonic Super Special. The Knuckles portion would have begun in issue 33 of the series. However, since the series was canceled after issue 32, as a result, the adaptation underwent a formatting. The 2 Knuckles stories were split up into 4 backup stories that ran in the back of the main Sonic issues, meaning that the main Sonic stories had to be halved, making it so that the adaptation took up 6 issues rather than 4. So basically, because Archie, and I think to an extent Sega, put the kibosh on the Knuckles comic after 32 issues, the initial plans for Adventure to kind of continue in there, the Sonic Adventure comic to continue in there, were kind of, basically re-edited, reformatted, and all that to become 4 backup stories in the main comic instead of their own issues. It's kind of like what we have in Worlds Collide and Worlds Unite. With those stories, in that crossover, you had a lot of them divided between comics. You had the main book, I think you had 4 issues there. You had 4 issues in Universe, 4 issues in Boom. You had 4 issues in Mega Man, and so forth. And even the first one, which was Worlds Collide, I believe, you had so many issues of Sonic, so many issues of Mega Man, and so many issues of Universe to help tie into it. And I think even so many issues of X, I believe, as well. Sonic X, that is. So, basically the idea of, hey, let's do 4 issues of the main comic to do this adaptation of this big video game of Sonic Adventure, and use 2 issues of the Knuckles book and and a Supersonic special issue to help bring it all together. It wouldn't have been, initially it would have been the first time, I should say, and in a sense it was, but it wouldn't have been the last. Unfortunately, that didn't come to be, because the only closest we got at that time was, it continuing in the Sonic Super Special. Well, the Knuckles stories, as it's mentioned, had to be moved over as 4 individual backup stories in the main Sonic book. Anyway, it also states that the cancellation of the Knuckles book also meant that the main Knuckles ongoing storyline had to be continued as backup stories in the main Sonic series. The backup stories ran semi-regularly from issue 88 to 125. The reformatting reportedly caused many minor script changes. So basically, because the book was canceled and they had to bring it over as backup stories to the main Sonic book, some of the things that were, initially in the story that were not too bad, that were not big of a deal, I guess, had to be changed because, they didn't have a comic to rely on their own. Now, we go on to Mobius 20 years later. That's right, 20 years later. It states The story was originally planned to be done in a Sonic Super Special issue. According to Ken Penders, the comic would have been kicked off with Julie Sue being informed of being pregnant. Originally, the main villain for the story would have been Dr. Ian Droid, or Dr. Ian Droid, the guy that was, the main villain in that Sonic Super Special crossover with Image Comics. Let's see. The main baddie from Sonic Super Special number 7. There you go, which was the crossover. Somewhere along the line. Okay, so it cut off a little bit. It's one thing I don't like about this. It kind of cut off a little bit. But basically, they're saying somewhere along. Well, anybody that knows about the story or knows about the background story knows that somewhere along the line it got changed. Basically, the idea was kibosh and was turned into Mobius 25 years later. But now we're going to get into something that's really interesting. Post-tossed in space. Now, post-tossed in space basically is referred to as, I guess you could say, the Karl Bollers run, because it basically takes place after Sonic, had seemingly sacrificed himself at the end of 125. But the actuality was he was blasted about 85,000 light years away, and he had to make his way back. And by the time he got back, essentially what he assumed was just a couple of weeks turned out to be a whole freaking year on Mobius. Yeah, what he assumed was just a couple of weeks away in space was a whole year, in Mobius, or on Mobius. Now, Tossed in Space was interesting because of several reasons. And it's very lengthy here. I was surprised at how lengthy this was. But this is what it says, and I quote. Karl Bollers posted a number of plans he had intended to implement in the comics following issues 134 that were ultimately never used. 2, which you can find at archive.sonic.hq.net as well. And I'll probably look that up eventually down the line, probably provide a link. That would have lasted as far as issue 150. Yeah, so essentially he had plans that would, he had storyline plans that would have basically continued one after the other for 16 issues. These are Karl Bollers' plans now. That kind of tie into Ken's, because Ken had to come in later on and kind of clean up a little bit of the mess that Karl left behind. Now, continuing on, and I quote, the Freedom Fighters, these are some of his plans, Karl Bollers' plans, that is, the Freedom Fighters would have been converted into a new team comprised of Sonic, Tails, Amy, Bunny, and Fiona, which we did kind of see. Having separated from Sally due to personal differences, Sonic would seek new potential love interests in the form of his teammates, but it would have interfered with the professional relationship. Fiona and Amy would have a rivalry of sorts over Sonic's affections, which would culminate in Amy and Sonic having a secret relationship after being stranded at sea together, during which time Amy's origins would have been explored in a fuller adaptation of Sonic CD. Now, continuing on. Tails' feelings towards Fiona would also bring him into conflict with Sonic, but would set them aside to focus on refitting the Tornado for space travel so that he could reunite with his parents on that planet that Sonic found them on. I'll put it that way. Rotor would retire from field duty in order to pursue a role analogous, or basically similar to that played by a Q of James Bond. Basically, I guess you could say technical person. In addition, Adam, which was the AI sentient being created by Robotnik during Sonic's time away, and Nicole, Sally's handheld, would form a relationship culminating in Adam rebelling against Eggman and joining the Kingdom of Acorn with Eggman's army of Shadowbots. Now that's kind of interesting when you really look at it. When you really read it back for the first time in a while, that's kind of interesting to an extent, because, you kind of get a gist of what Cole wanted to do and everything. That how some of the ideas did kind of make it into later stories, but it's really intriguing because here's the thing. They say the original idea was for Sonic and Amy to have a secret relationship, which flies, believe it or not, whether people like to hear it or not, flies in the face of what Sega originally, wanted to keep with Sonic and Amy, and that's basically Amy, being this friend, at first obsessed fan, then one of his BFFs that just didn't take the hint of, hey, Sonic's not a relationship kind of guy in Sega's eyes. So basically, Cole coming up with the idea to have Amy and Sonic have this secret relationship while developing this relationship while stranded at sea after discovering a more extensive background on where she came from, that being Amy, like I said, flies in the face of what, Sega, originally had pitched for, when it comes to that kind of a connection between the two. And then Tails still having, feelings for Fiona and bringing him in conflict with Sonic, but then kind of, shelving that to focus on making the tornado more suited for space travel to go to that planet to get his parents back. I think that would have probably been a better direction to stick with. I will admit that. I think that's a better direction to stick with. But unfortunately, that's not what happened. And, we ended up getting basically the situation that we did. Now, what I found interesting is the secret relationship part that Karl wanted to originally put Sonic in with Amy went to Fiona. So, yeah, there were some changes there. The Adam Nicole thing I thought would have been interesting, especially with the fact that if Adam would have rebelled, gone over to the Kingdom of Acorn and brought the Shadowbots with him, I think that would have been great too. Because then what you could have done, basically, is you could see Sonic being like, oh shit, we got the Shadowbots on our side. I wonder. But then again, Sonic being Sonic in the story probably wouldn't have trusted them because it was like, hey, Adam, even though you brought these guys over, who's to say that, your daddy, Eggman, won't be able to reprogram them and bring them back to his side. So it was really interesting to see that. Now, continuing on, these are Karl Bollers' ideas, which kind of tie in with Ken's. It says here, and I quote, Eggman would find himself with multiple rivals beyond Sonic, including Shadow and a mysterious 15-foot-tall robot known as Skarkius. Eggman would later kidnap Hope Knippo, or Hope Robotnik, basically his niece, under the pretense that he is under the pretense that he is the correct choice to be her legal guardian, while generally using her as bait to lure Shadow the Hedgehog, acting as a mysterious guardian for Hope. Skarkius, eventually revealed to be Snively in disguise, having formed an alliance with Shadow to try and get revenge on Eggman for leaving him to die during the Zorda invasion, which was 124 to 125. In addition, Coconuts would find a deroboticized and amnesic Nate Morgan, having survived the destruction of Robotropolis, turning his still incredible genius into a weapon, rebuilding the original Metal Sonic, as well as a Tails doll, Metal Knuckles, and Metal Amy. These four robots would attack New Megalopolis and Naho City, with everyone believing they've been roboticized. During the conflict, Metal Sonic would gain enough power to morph into Metal Overlord. So basically, his ideas here were, have Eggman kidnap Hope to not only with the pretense of saying, hey, I'm the only family you got left, so it makes me your rightful legal guardian, but really using it to bait Shadow. And then we find out that Snively, who we thought had died in the Zorda invasion, or was originally meant to die, would come back as a Skarkaris in teaming up with Shadow to get revenge on Eggman and stuff. And then of course, Coconuts, which was a comedic character in the Adventures cartoon and in the comics. I guess what Karl decided, hey, I'm going to bring this guy back, make him a threat. He's going to find an amnesic, deroboticized Nate Morgan, and he's going to use that genius that Nate still has, even in an amnesic stage, to make him or rebuild him Metal Sonic Onic, and then of course build him a Tails doll, and then metal versions of Knuckles and Amy. With the idea that people would think they were roboticized, but then when we see Metal Sonic, I guess, gain enough power and morph into Metal Overlord, which would overthrow Coconuts, if you will. Okay, continuing on, and I quote. These are, again, Karl's ideas tying in with Ken's, or kind of melding in with Ken's, if you will. It goes on to later say, and I quote, Sally would have been revealed to be a pawn in a villainous plot by the source of all, having survived the destruction of Robotropolis and reconstituting itself in a remote mountain range, set to prevent the future. Okay, let me reread that, and I quote. Sally would have been revealed to be a pawn in a villainous plot by the source of all, having survived the destruction of Robotropolis and reconstituting itself in a remote mountain range, set to prevent the future seen in Sonic in Your Face. To protect it, the children of Arachnus, who was a female spider war ninja character, would have gathered as a group known as the Strand, due to being corrupted by Ixis Nagus. Nagus would have possessed King Max through the crown and used him as a puppet to attempt to gain a physical form, transforming Max's body into a duplicate of his own, only to be thwarted by the destruction of the crown of Acorns. So yeah, you remember that source of all, that I think it was in the Sonic Super Special, focusing on the girls, the Sonic Girls one. Well, in that Sonic Girls issue for Sonic Super Special, apparently that source of all, which would also be continued on in the main issues, would basically use Sally as a pawn. Like, even though, along with the destruction of Robotropolis, it seemingly was destroyed, basically it would have somehow survived, and because of its connection with Sally being like the next heir to the throne, would have said, nope, I'm not gone yet, and I'm going to use you to get what I want. So, there's no doubt Sally would have survived and been uncorrupted and everything, or unpawned, if you will. But still, for her to be utilized as a pawn and everything, which I guess in Karl's mind would explain why her actions of her outburst in 134 and all that would have made sense. Like, that's not Sally, really. That's the source of all corrupting her into doing this. So, it's really interesting to hear that. And then, of course, we get the Strand and the whole thing. A lot of these ideas are interesting and all that. So for them not to be utilized, it is kind of a surprise. But I think, in a way, they're described. Also kind of ties into what the book is supposed to be, which is for all ages. So I can understand maybe why Archie and Sega, shot them down. I can understand that. Now, continuing on, and if it does cut off, I do apologize, because that's what it's been known to do. And again, these are long. I was like, holy crap, not that much longer. Continuing on, it says, Antron's darker demeanor and loss of innocence is revealed to be the result of him succumbing to the Source's will too. One day, Mary Princess Sally... Okay, let me reread that. It says, and I quote, Antron's darker demeanor and loss of innocence is revealed to be the result of him succumbing to the Source's will too. One day, to the Source's will too, one day. Marrying Princess Sally without any given reason, which would result in the Source bonding with Sally permanently. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. We kind of see something like that. But it was changed around, as we know. But let me reread that, because I know it sounded like a bunch of gobble and all that. But let me reread that, and I quote. Antoine's darker demeanor and loss of innocence is revealed to be the result of him succumbing to the Source's will too. One day... okay, let me reread that, because they have it typed up differently. Antoine's darker demeanor and loss of innocence is revealed to be the result of him succumbing to the Source's will too one day. Marry Princess Sally without any given reason, which would result in the Source bonding with Sally permanently, in hopes of winning Bunny back Antoine allows himself to be possessed by the corrupted source. And again, it cuts off there. But basically, yeah, it shows that what we got with Antoine and everything, and the darkness and all that, would have been a result of the source of all being corrupted. And I'll get into this, towards the end and all that. But it definitely sounds like some of these ideas, they sound good on paper, would have looked good on, in picture, but obviously were not meant to be or anything. Gonna drink some coffee there. Alright, continuing on. Okay, so it goes into some other things here, like Locke and Laura Lee would have set the previous dispute aside to help raise kneecaps after his father ends up in the egg-grape chamber. Meanwhile, Knuckles would depart Angel Island after learning that his presence exposes the location of the Master Emerald, going on a global pilgrimage to learn martial arts and battling Monkey Khan while under the control of the Iron Queen before discovering the Master Geode, a powerful gemstone capable of restoring one's life. Mammoth Mogul, beginning to age rapidly due to his original Chaos Emerald running out of energy, forces himself to seek out the alternative source through elite archaeological expeditions and hiring mercenaries like Knack the Weasel. The Master Geode would be contested by him, the Iron Queen, Dr. Eggman, and Rouge the Bat. So we would have gotten the Geodes in there. It says a new Dingo regime leader named Colonel Mange would have been introduced with Crocobot, Jackrabbit, and Gil Nye being reintroduced as Eggman's sub-bosses over Down Under, the Great Desert, and Abilene. This would have led to the disappearance of the Down Under Freedom Fighters and a confrontation involving the Merced Freedom Fighters in the meantime. This would have led to the disappearance of the Down Under Freedom Fighters and a confrontation involving the Merced Freedom Fighters. In the meantime, Evil Sonic would come to enjoy impersonating Sonic and enjoying the love of his parents and adulation of his people, leading him to plan to eliminate Sonic and permanently take his place. So there's a lot of stuff here that, again, some of the ideas did get put into the book, or at least were loosely adapted into the stories, into the issues, and some, of course, downright, taken out. But yeah, I'll put it this way: when you have, a new Dingo regime leader in Colonel Mage, Croctobot, Jack Rabbit, who was leader of the Sandblast Freedom Fighters, and Gaia Nay, who was basically, I guess you could say, a member of the Brotherhood in Avalon, becoming sub-bosses for Eggman, that really makes things interesting, because I think the Gaia Nay girl, the Echidna girl, she wouldn't have been a sub-boss for long, in my opinion. Like, she's only doing it for her people. Well, Jack Rabbit, I think, fits in perfectly. It's like, hey, if I can't, you'll get what I want as a freedom fighter, I might as well just join the side I'm supposed to be against. So yeah, that's kind of cool. And then, of course, to do the extension idea of, we see Evil Sonic do what he did in 150, but to extend on that and say, hey, I'm just gonna stay here now. This sounds great. I'm getting the ladies. I'm getting the adulation of the parents. I'm getting the adulation of the people. I think I'm gonna stay here, and the only way I can make that happen is to get rid of my doppelganger. And again, we kind of get some of those ideas kept in the story that we got. Okay. Romy Chacon, according to penciler John Gray's website, on Sonic 144, see if I can find it here, Romana Cha's Love and Loss was extensively rewritten by him after discussions between the former and editor Mike Politro. Some of the changes are Bunny's letter mentioning how Antoine once loved her for who she was and not what she looked like, instead of concentrating on how Antoine would now get verbally nasty with Bunny. Mina's letter was changed to reflect on her internal conflict between Ash and Sonic and provide a way for her to finally make up her mind rather than the way it was worded originally, which left an opening for the rekindling of the love triangle. The scene with Mina calling Ash was also changed, extending from lost us than a panel or two, or expanding from less than a panel or two. Let me reread that. It says the scene with Mina calling Ash was also changed, extending from less than a panel or two to 6, with the reader seeing all the reactions from Ash as he talks to her and ending with a smile on his face rather than the let's date call the original had. It says Amy's letter, while concentrating on Sonic, also had Amy throwing hints at Tails in the original, which was discarded in the final version. Sally's letter and ending was completely rewritten several times before the final version. The wording in the original focused on the aftermath of her breaking up with Sonic as part of the letter written as follows, and I think it does cut off. Okay. It says, I asked him to be with me and drop his missions. And it kind of ends there. But then it still continues on here. And I quote, this is another part of it. That's the one thing about when you print things from the actual web pages, they do cut off. Some I never liked. But it does continue somewhat, and it goes like this. The ending went under four iterations. The ending went under 4 iterations. In the original ending, Sally breaks the fourth wall and began talking to the reader. Teasing at first, she explains the letter to herself was to throw everyone okay. Let me reread that, and I quote. The ending went under 4 iterations. In the original ending, Sally breaks the fourth wall and began talking to the reader. Teasing at first, she explains the letter to herself was to throw off anyone who may think Allie is Sally, as her secrets are made public for the entire world to see. But maybe not all of them. And when questioned why she does this in her free time, she ends the story by replying that a girl's got to have a hobby, you know. The first rewrite kept the fourth wall ending, but threw out everything else and changed the text to reflect the context of the story. The second rewrite removed the fourth wall ending along with a redrawing, which would be the way Love and Loss was intended to end. However, the package with the last page was ruined in a rainstorm of Hurricane Francis, with no further copies existing, making it impossible for the page to be reproduced. With a ruined page and a deadline to print, Perlitto combined the second redrawing with the page designed to fit the original fourth wall ending, leading to the final version. So in other words, basically, you remember that side story they did with this alley girl basically talking about all this and such? Well, apparently that was supposed to be Sally not only answering questions for the characters. As I look something up here, hold on, guys. Let's see. Here we go. Okay, take that out. Okay, so here's the Sally part in full, guys. It says, the word Sally's letter and ending was completely rewritten several times before the final version. It says, and I quote, the wording in the original focused on the aftermath of her breaking up with Sonic, with part of the letter written as follows. I've asked him to be with me and drop his missions, but he's too stubborn to do it until Robotnik's reign is at an end. I gave him an ultimatum. It was either me or his missions. He couldn't choose, so I chose for him. I walked. I know he's right, but I'm right too. This was changed to focus on the reasoning behind her decision. Now, here's where it continues. Okay, so basically, well, okay, that's not where it continues, but that's basically where it cut off originally. Now, okay, here we go. This is the Antoine. Okay, here's the Antoine portion that also got cut off in a quote. It says, Antoine's darker demeanor and loss of innocence is revealed to be the result of him succumbing to the source's will too. One day, okay. Let me read that. I know they got to reword it. They got to type up. They got to correct their typing here. Let me read this. And I quote: Antoine's darker demeanor and loss of innocence is revealed to be a result of him succumbing to the source's will too. One day, marry Princess Sally without any given reason, which would result in the source bonding with Sally permanently. In hopes of winning Bunny back, Antoine allows himself to be possessed by the corrupted source, turning him into a villain. Bunny's breakup with Antoine would later lead to Bunny's origins being explored and her true name being revealed as Scarlet O'Hare, which may have served as the inspiration for Scarlet Rabbit and Bunny's code name when she was in the Metropolis Egg Army. Okay, so there you go. So yeah, that's basically what got cut off a little bit. So now we're going to get into Ken Penders here, and I got that open right there so I can make sure I have some kind of connection. Ken Penders. Now Ken, apparently, and this is the last of it, it says here, and I quote, Ken posted a number of plans let me reread. It says, and I quote, Ken Penders posted a number of plans he had intended to implement in the comics following issue 159 of Archie Sonic the Hedgehog that were ultimately never used. And you can find these at archive.org as well, with the synopsis of the stories lasting as far as issue 176. Now, these are his story ideas. These are ideas he had planned had he stayed on the book. These are, and I quote, the Mobius 25 years later story would have concluded with King Sonic being unable to fix the damage, leading to Rotor to send Nicole into the past as pre-Sonic in your face. So in other words, what we see at the end of the original Mobius 25 years later arc, with Sonic vanishing into the timeline, he would have come back. Basically that would have been followed up with him being able to undo what happened in the past, coming back, and Rotor saying, okay, I know what to do, sending Nicole back in time as a result, which I guess would have resulted in Nicole knowing about the future and kind of saying, hey, don't do this, because if you do, this will happen, so do this. Or something like that. Another story arc, or another story idea would be Mina and Amy Rose would have made their way into Robotnik's stronghold to prove they are just as capable on their own as any freedom fighter, and Sally and Sonic would head out after them only to discover Rouge and Nicole the Weasel, or Nicolette the Weasel, Knack's sister, are each looking to abscond with a rare gem that would power Robotnik's latest weapon. So I don't know if that means Rouge and Nicolette were fighting over this gem, or which would probably be in the same area, or same place, or same situation that Amy and Mina would be in. But that's interesting to know. It goes on to continue. One of the other ideas, Sonic tries to find a core of his father's robotization after hearing him resenting. Okay, Sonic tries to find, this is another idea, Sonic tries to find a core for his, or a cure, not a cure, not a core. Easy for me to say. Let me reread this, and I quote, the other story idea is Sonic tries to find a cure for his father's robotization after hearing him resenting his condition as a Robian. And with the aid of his Uncle Chuck, they would use a piece of nanotechnology stolen from Robotnik on him. While Jules would still be a Robian, he would have ended up resembling his organic form, because of it. So in other words, the other story idea is that Sonic, along with Uncle Chuck, I guess would go on some kind of secret mission, take some nanotechnology, unbeknownst to Robotnik, away from him, bring it back and use it on Jules to not totally restore him, but basically make him look like on the outside of what he originally was instead of what he actually looks like on the inside. So, I guess that makes sense. Continuing on, and I quote, the other storyline would be, Antoine would attempt to propose to Bunny only to be interrupted by a mission to shut down Robotnik's power plant before a meltdown in the core, which would lead to her heroic sacrifice by Snively, which Sonic, I guess it's a Sonic reeling from his death. Yeah, Sonic reeling from his death. Continuing on, I quote, Sonic's first task as a gentleman at arms would be to accompany Sally to Station Square as she sets up Knottle's first embassy in a foreign land, which makes things awkward. And let me go over here to read the rest. Okay, it says, and I quote, Sonic's first task as a gentleman at arms would be to accompany Sally to Station Square as she sets up Knottle's first embassy in a foreign land, which makes things awkward for them. This would also lead to other struggles, such as Antoine's duty as head of the Royal Guard, conflict with his, basically... Alright, sorry about that, guys. That was my mom calling. She's going to be coming back, basically. She had to go to the doctors, take care of something that women her age or around that age range have to take care of every once in a while. Not going to say what it is, but let's just say it's something they have to take care of. But anyway, continuing on, and I quote, reading off of here, because again, like I said, the things, kind of cut off at the end when you print them off the webpage. Continuing on, and I quote, it says, Sonic's first task as a gentleman at arms would be to accompany Sally to Station Square as she sets up Knottle's first embassy in a foreign land, which makes things awkward for them. This would also lead to other struggles, such as Antoine's duty as head of the Royal Guard, conflict with his proposal to Bunny, evil Sonic causing trouble, and Knuckles and the Chaotix showing up at Station Square trying to fight the group that attempted to invade Angel Island. Now, continuing on, and I quote, this should be the last of it here. There's no other thing here, so this should be the last of it. Continuing on, and I quote, and I also had to change batteries on the camera, because if I would have continued even without the phone interruption, it probably would have died on me. Continuing on, and I quote, when Karl left, Ken had a number of plans set up. The biggest of which was that he was going to try to fix the breakup between Sonic and Sally, which according to him would have explored the relationship in greater depth through several trials and tribulations in which neither was sure what they themselves or the other really wanted, and that Sonic would be playing the field for a while, allowing him to discover exactly why Sally was always the girl for him. So in other words, one of the things he wanted to fix, of course, was that relationship situation. And by Sonic playing the field, if you will, means obviously it wouldn't just be with Fiona, but that the Fiona thing would probably be something that wouldn't last too long and probably would have been initially a mutual breakup, and then maybe lead him to potentially maybe dating Amy to see what's there. But then realizing after Amy, and I guess this would help Amy probably mature. Again, this is my opinion of how I think it would have been gone or would have led to. Probably would have led to Amy maturing a little bit more and realizing, okay, Sonic, I see what's going on. You still have feelings for Sally, and you were just testing the waters out and all that. Probably would have led to Amy being more accepting of, hey, if she's meant to be your girl, that's not a problem. I do appreciate the fact that you were at least looking at me as a potential love interest or something like that. Again, just an opinion. Continuing on. Another romantic plot point would have been Antoine's attempts to ask Bunny to marry him, as mentioned above, and on whether Bunny would accept or not, based on the fact that she wasn't sure her and Antoine could lead a normal life due to her bionic parts, but wouldn't get an answer until 175. This would lead to their marriage, which would have happened around issue 200. According to Penders, years later, Jeffrey was originally planned to have had a sexual relationship with Sally at some point, but no opportunity was made to include it into the story prior to Penders' departure from his writing role, acknowledging that it was a story he could not have told in the comic. Now, it has gone on for the record that basically the idea is that let me figure this out here. Basically, it's gone on record that the story initially was a story told to Penders by the higher ups at at Archie. It was told basically Penders has gone on record by saying that it was told to him by the higher ups at Archie that they wanted to go in a more mature streamline of stories for all the books. And what I mean by more mature streamline, or more kind of like older stories with more mature tones and themes and all that, that they felt would be more attractive to the fan base, if you will, to the fan base that was growing up. But that didn't happen. That never happened due to the fact that just when it looked like they were probably going to go in that direction, they got cold feet, because something may have happened. I think there was some changes going on and stuff, and because they got cold feet, they decided not to go with it, not to go in that direction. And Ken's idea for Sally and Jeffrey to have a sexual intercourse off panel didn't come to fruition. Now, for them to say that it was, that Ken had mentioned that it was a story that he couldn't even tell in the comics, is not necessarily true. Because if the initial plan was to go in that direction of making the comics more mature in a sense, and for the older audience, they could have at least acknowledged it in some manner. Like they could have, I guess you could say cheeky kind of wording, have the characters, at least Sally, admit to Sonic that this happened, but nothing resulted of it. Like in other words, acknowledging that, hey, I didn't get pregnant. She doesn't have to say it, but she doesn't have to say it to that extent. But have it acknowledged that she did have this moment with, Jeffrey, but nothing came of it. Nothing came of it. And even have Jeffrey tell Hershey later on, if the plan was to put them together, that this did happen, but nothing came of it. They could have done that. They could have easily done that had they gone in the direction of more mature stories aimed at an older audience. But again, like I said, they didn't do that because they had cold feet. But yeah, some of the ideas here. Some of the ideas that Ken had, and I'll provide a link in the description to where you can find these if you haven't read up on them yet. Some of these ideas that Ken, Karl, Ramon had, they sound good on paper. They sounded like they had the potential to be good on paper, but they never were able to see the light of day, unfortunately. Now, like I said, did some of the concepts, some of the ideas make it into the stories that we saw and read? Absolutely. Absolutely, they made it in there. But unfortunately, what was originally intended to be overall didn't. Like I said, some of the ideas did get in there, in the stories that they were meant to get into, and some got in later on courtesy of other writers. But overall, the concepts and the ideas, again, they had the potential. They just, I guess, because of the time frame and everything, just did not sit well with the people at Archie Comics or Sega. Now, nowadays, I will say this. Nowadays, if they wanted to come up with these stories, there's no doubt, in my opinion, they probably would be able to do them. and kind of hint at certain things that would have happened with the characters, but we'll never know. But overall, again, it's interesting to go back and read up on what would have been some of these ideas and stuff, in the comic, had they come to fruition, had they come to reality. It's interesting to see what would have been, and again, what was kept technically and put into the books, at that time or later on, and what wasn't, and maybe what, and maybe what we could have, led to storyline wise had things, been, kept in there originally. Basically had Sega and Archie not come in and said, no, you can't do that. And Penders and Bollers and Gallagher and all them were, allowed to do what they wanted to do. Who knows how the stories would have gone from there. But again, it's interesting to go back and read that, and I recommend you guys click on the link in the description and check it out for yourself. Now, I'm going to take a break here, guys, real quickly, and I might try to do the Ian Flynn one as well in a moment, but I wanted to come on here and talk about some of the unused concepts and everything, unused storylines and concepts by Penders, Bollers, and company on what would have been, what could have been, not would have been, but what could have been seen and read in the comic originally compared to what we got. But let me know what your guys' thoughts are. Comment below. Live chat during the premiere. Where super chats and super stickers all open and would be appreciated. Also, okay, let me reread that. Reset that. Okay. Once again, I want to thank you guys for watching. I know this video may have been long. Again, you can click on the link yourself to read what I read off here in your own time. But, I want to thank you guys for watching. And if you want to donate, the super thanks button is open and is enabled, so you guys can click on that. Also, super chats and super stickers in the live chat during the premiere are also appreciated. Also, comment down below. Also, check me out at my Teespring store. Also, check me out at BW Rose's Discussions, all your favorite audio podcast locations, except for Pandora. Also, check me out at VENMO at BW Roses for content you can't get here on YouTube due to copyright reasons. Also, check me out at deviantart.com/BVW1979. Also, check me out at patreon.com/BWRoses to support me with a $1, $3 tier. Also, check me out at Venmo at Brian-Walmer-2 to help me out there financially. And at Cash App at BWRoses98. So until next time, guys, again, thank you all for watching. And I'm going to take a break here, and I'm going to come back later in just a little bit. Hopefully do the Ian Flynn ones before my mom gets here. And until then, peace out.